He worked in silence most nights, moving through the long empty halls with a mop bucket and a small radio that rarely had batteries in it. People inside the company would pass him during the day, but they barely looked his way. If they did, it was only for a second, like a glance towards something that didn't matter much. He never complained. He simply nodded, smiled when needed, and continued working. The man's name was Daniel. He worked as a night shift custodian in a corporate building that had shiny glass walls, tall potted plants, and offices filled with busy people who never really knew him. There were times when he wanted to tell someone what his life used to be like, what dreams he once had, but he never opened that door. He stayed quiet, doing his job. Daniel was not someone who drew attention. He wore simple clothes, blue uniform shirt, faded black shoes, and a jacket that had a torn pocket. His shift began when most employees were going home. The building was almost always silent when he arrived. Computers were shut down, office lights dimmed, and the sounds of laughter or meetings faded into nothing. That quiet was something he was used to. At home, outside of this building, life was different. He had a daughter named Mia. She was 12, bright-eyed, cheerful, and wiser than most kids her age. At night, Daniel cooked for her, helped her with homework, and sometimes fell asleep in the living room chair because he had to wake up early and come to work again. Every day felt similar, and every decision he made was built around providing for her. Mia never complained about anything, not about hand-me-down clothes, not about the small apartment, not about her dad being gone at night. She often waited up for him with a bowl of cereal beside her, sometimes drawing pictures for him and leaving them on the table. Daniel always saved those drawings in a showbox. That showbox was one of his few treasures. The people at work didn't know why Daniel sometimes looked exhausted, or why he wore the same jacket year after year. They didn't know that he had once been someone else, someone respected, someone educated, someone talented. He never told anyone because no one ever asked. He was simply the night custodian, the one who emptied trash cans and polished floors after everyone left. There was a time when Daniel was not quiet. Years ago, he attended a music school on scholarship. He had dreams, big ones. He used to stay awake late at night, not because of work, but because he practiced for auditions. He dreamed of stages, concert halls, grand pianos lit by bright lights. He dreamed of writing music that made people pause, listen, maybe even cry. Life changed when his daughter came into the world and her mother walked away. In one moment, everything shifted: priorities, routines, dreams, finances. The scholarship wasn't enough to raise a baby. Music didn't come with a steady paycheck, and baby formula, doctor visits, and rent were not small expenses. So Daniel gave up the scholarship and began working jobs that paid quickly: warehouse shifts, delivery routes, cleaning jobs. He never complained because he didn't have time to. The company he worked at now was not glamorous, but it was steady, and steady meant security. Security meant Mia could stay in school, have food, and go to sleep in a warm bed. Most employees barely looked at Daniel, but there were a few who treated him kindly. There was an older security guard who nodded to him every night, and sometimes offered leftover sandwiches. Another worker left coffee on the table near the lobby with a sticky note that said, "For whoever wants it." Daniel never knew if it was for him specifically, but he always took one cup and smiled. One afternoon he arrived early, and the lobby was filled with people from upper management. They were dressed in business suits, wearing badges with gold clips. They seemed important, talking loudly, giving instructions, preparing for some kind of company event. Daniel remained in the background, pushing his cleaning cart quietly as he tried not to disturb them. They didn't notice him. That was normal. He had learned how to vanish into the space around him. When people didn't look at you, fading into the background became easy. It was like becoming air present, but unseen. Daniel took pride in doing things right. When he collected trash, he folded the new liner neatly inside the can. When he washed floors, he dried them with a fan so no one would slip. When he cleaned the lobby windows, he wiped them until they reflected clearly. Small details mattered to him, even if nobody complimented his work. Sometimes, when no one was watching, Daniel paused near the grand piano in the lobby. It sat near a curved staircase, covered each night with a black cloth so fingerprints wouldn't smudge its surface. He would rest his hand on the corner of the piano, not enough to uncover it, not enough to disturb anything, but enough to feel something familiar. He didn't play, he didn't dare, but he remembered. Technically, he still knew everything he once practiced. The muscle memory had not disappeared. The music lived somewhere in his hands, like a sleeping animal that might wake if called. But Daniel had not touched a piano in more than a decade. He avoided it on purpose. Music was something beautiful, and sometimes beautiful things hurt when remembered. At work he stayed quiet, wiping tables and spraying glass cleaner, but his mind often drifted back to old concert halls he once visited, to a small music studio where he used to practice, to a moment when his professor told him, "You have potential far beyond technique." But those memories disappeared each time his alarm rang, reminding him he still had hallways to sweep before going home. When Daniel's shift ended, the sun was usually rising. He would leave through the side entrance, walk to the bus stop, sit alone on a metal bench, and think of the morning he would wake up in 3 hours to make breakfast. Life moved like that for a long time. No one around him knew what he carried. When the employees arrived each morning, they walked across freshly polished floors. They saw trash cans empty, windows sparkling, desks clean. They never wondered who did it. They never thought about the invisible person working after dark. One Friday evening, Daniel came to work like any other night. But that night was different, though he didn't know it yet. The corporate team was planning a small celebration, something informal, something that involved music, speeches, laughing, and food. It wasn't Daniel's event. He had no reason to participate. He planned only to clean after it ended. But that night would be the beginning of change. Before the event, Daniel sat in the break room and unfolded a small handwritten note from his daughter. She had drawn a picture of them sitting on a couch watching a movie together. Under the picture she wrote, "I can't wait for Saturday movie night. I miss you at night, but thank you for working so hard." Daniel read it twice. He folded it carefully and placed it in his wallet. He promised himself not to miss movie night that weekend. Then he stood up, put on his gloves, and walked out into the hallway with his usual quiet steps. He didn't know that someone at the event later that night would notice him not just as a custodian, but as something entirely different. For now, though, he was just Daniel carrying a cleaning cart, pushing open doors softly, humming quietly so no one would hear. Life felt ordinary, but ordinary was about to shift. He didn't know that just beyond the lobby, musicians were setting up. He didn't know that a conversation would soon begin, one that would bring him close to the piano he always avoided. He didn't know that someone important would be standing near him, watching more closely than anyone ever had. All he knew was that he had work to do, and he did it with care. Like always, he never expected that one night of cleaning would turn into something unforgettable. He never expected people to learn about the life he used to live, and he never imagined that a moment was coming when silence would break, and his music would return. But that was not happening yet. For now, he swept the quiet hallways, unaware that everything was changing without his permission. And in a few hours, when laughter filled the lobby and voices echoed through the building, Daniel would be in the same space but recognized differently. His story did not begin that night, but it would finally be seen. The evening began differently than usual. The lobby of the building was decorated with balloons, small signs taped to glass doors, and tables covered with white cloth. A catering company had already set up trays of food that smelled warm and sweet. Soft lights were placed near the staircase, and in the center of the lobby stood the grand piano, uncovered for the first time in months. Daniel walked in through the service entrance holding his lunch bag. He didn't look around too much at first. Decorations never really mattered to him. His plan was the same: finish cleaning the second floor, wipe down elevator panels, sweep the corridors, and then start working his way downstairs once everyone left. But people did not leave. Instead, they gathered. They stayed longer than expected, and Daniel realized the building was not going to be quiet right away. He would have to work quietly around them. He put on his gloves, filled his mop bucket, and began working in a side hallway. Every so often he could hear laughter coming from the lobby. People talked loudly, music played softly through speakers, and someone announced instructions for the evening. Daniel didn't step closer. He stayed where he belonged: his side hallways, cleaning areas, empty meeting rooms. When he finished an area near the lobby, he walked into a room where he could see parts of the event. There were groups standing around with drinks in their hands. Some people wore shiny shoes, others held notebooks even though it was a casual event. A photographer was taking pictures of company leaders. Daniel paused only long enough to plug in a vacuum, then began working. The sound of the vacuum drowned out most of the chatter, which he preferred. Then someone noticed him. 2 younger employees were sitting near the lobby entrance. They looked bored, like they were only attending because they were expected to. One of them saw Daniel and said, "Hey, you're here early. You working while the party's going on?" Daniel smiled politely and nodded. They continued talking, not really caring about his answer. Eventually, they drifted toward the piano like many others did. The piano was polished, shining under yellow lights. People tapped its keys lightly and laughed when they hit wrong notes. No one played anything meaningful. They pressed keys only to joke around. Daniel tried not to watch, but something about seeing the piano uncovered made his chest tighten. He was so used to seeing it covered in that dark cloth. Now it sat exposed, waiting for someone who understood it, not someone using it like a toy. One of the younger employees placed both hands on the keyboard and played random keys loudly. Laughing, his friend joined in, pressing opposite notes. It sounded like a cartoon. A few people clapped not because it was good, but because it was funny. Daniel turned away again. He rolled his cleaning cart toward the restroom area, mopping as he went. He knew that once the party ended, spills, crumbs, and glitter from decorations would be everywhere. Quiet cleanup at the end, that was his specialty. More laughter echoed through the lobby. Someone started a speech. Everyone applauded. Daniel stayed near the hallway and kept sweeping. He thought about Mia at home. She would be watching her favorite show. She would probably eat cereal for dinner again because payday was tomorrow. He would cook a big meal on Saturday to make up for it. The thought gave him a tiny smile. That smile faded as he walked past the lobby again. A small group gathered around the piano. The same employee who joked earlier now said loudly, "We need music. Someone should play something." His friend pointed at Daniel. "Ask him. He's always here. Maybe he knows something." It wasn't meant as admiration. It was said because he was standing close and because no one else volunteered. Another voice joined. "Yeah, come on. Why not?" A few others laughed. Daniel raised his hands slightly, shaking his head gently. "No, I'm working," he said softly. The group wasn't satisfied. "Oh, come on, just one song." Someone called over their shoulder to the senior manager standing nearby. "Hey, tell him to play." The manager waved casually and said, "Only if he wants to." Daniel tried to step away, but another person blocked him. "It's just a joke," someone whispered. "Just press something. Press something." That was all they expected. A couple of the employees grinned, waiting for him to make a fool of himself. Daniel looked at the piano. He swallowed. He told himself not to do it, not to get pulled and not to uncover the past that he had buried, but something inside him felt different this time. Maybe it was because Mia had drawn that picture earlier. Maybe it was because he had been invisible too long. Maybe because the piano was uncovered, shining in the center of the room like someone had been waiting for it. He walked slowly toward the piano. His shoes squeaked softly on the polished floor. The group quieted, not fully silent, but quieter than before. Daniel sat on the bench, not like a performer, not like someone preparing for a stage, but like a man who was unsure if he belonged there at all. Someone said, "Make it quick." Someone else chuckled. Daniel didn't respond. He placed both hands on the keys, not pressing them, just resting. His hands felt stiff, almost shy. The cool surface of each key reminded him of something familiar, something he had once known deeply. He pressed a single note. Just one. People waited. Daniel closed his eyes, not for drama, but because that was how he used to feel the sound. A second note followed, then a third. He paused again, breathing slowly. Someone whispered, "Is he trying to tune it?" The crowd laughed. Daniel ignored them. Inside his mind, he searched for something he hadn't reached for in years, and then, without planning it, he began to play, a soft sequence, slow at first, like a small echo of memory breaking open. His fingers moved across the keys gently. The notes blended, not loud, not forced, just honest. Each sound fell into the air like something carefully placed. Someone stopped laughing. Another person stopped talking. Daniel didn't look at them. He didn't look anywhere. His eyes stayed closed. The simple melody grew slowly, building into something layered. Left hand forming a steady support, right hand rising, shaping tone after tone until the lobby felt like a different place. A few workers looked around, unsure how to react. The joking group turned silent. People stepped closer. Phones were lowered instead of lifted. Someone whispered, "Way, he actually knows how to play." Daniel didn't hear that part. Inside himself, the music unlocked memories. He remembered being young, sitting in an empty practice hall playing to prove something. He remembered applause once, from people who believed in him. He remembered holding his daughter as a newborn, promising her safety. He remembered letting go of stages, of performances, of lessons, of long nights of practice. And yet here he was touching a piano again. After all these years, his body remembered everything the way water remembers a riverbed. The melody changed again, not a song he practiced earlier, not something from sheet music. It was simply what came out when feelings turned into sound. The room stayed still. Even the catering workers stopped moving. Someone from upper management stepped forward now, watching closely with arms folded, not dismissively, not casually, just watching. Daniel eventually slowed, letting the final notes rest gently before fading. Then he lifted his hands and set them on his lap. No applause came. Immediately people were stuck between surprise and disbelief. Then someone clapped softly. Another joined. Soon more followed, not playful clapping, not joking clapping, but something respectful. Someone said quietly, "Where did he learn that?" Another whispered, "He must have taken lessons." Someone else added, "That wasn't random. That was something real." Daniel stood up, smiling politely, as if his moment belonged to another person. One of the younger workers who mopped before now walked up, smiling awkwardly. "I didn't know you could play like that," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Daniel nodded gently and said, "I used to play. Long time ago. Nothing more." He walked back to his cleaning cart. The event continued, though no one returned to pressing random keys anymore. The piano stayed untouched for the rest of the night. A few people talked about him quietly, trying to understand how someone invisible to them could hold so much talent. But Daniel didn't stay to hear any of that. He pushed his cleaning cart into the hallway, moving softly again, like he always had. But something had changed, not in the building, not in the crowd, but inside him. He touched the piano again. He allowed himself to exist, not just as someone cleaning the place, but as someone who once mattered. That night wasn't loud anymore. It wasn't filled with laughter. It wasn't filled with jokes. It was filled with something else, recognition. The music did not bring applause because it was impressive. It brought silence because it was honest. Daniel continued working until midnight, but the sound of the piano stayed in the lobby, almost like an echo trapped inside the walls. And somewhere near closing time, someone important would come looking for him, not because they needed a floor cleaned, but because what he played had reached them differently. But that moment was still ahead. For now, Daniel just wiped tables and emptied trash cans. But something inside him felt lighter, and everything that was quiet before began to awaken. The night did not go back to normal after Daniel played the piano. People continued their celebration, but the tone had changed. The joking and playful noise had softened. The large lobby, which earlier felt loud and buzzing with energy, now felt calmer, almost thoughtful. Daniel continued cleaning quietly. He wiped counters, rearranged chairs, emptied trash bins filled with crumpled napkins and used paper cups. He tried to stay away from the center area because he did not want more attention. He was used to being invisible, and honestly, he preferred it. But something about that evening was different. Someone had paid attention. Someone had seen him. Not long after he moved to the hallway, the manager in charge of the event walked toward him. Daniel kept wiping down a table as if he didn't see her coming. Eventually, she stopped beside him and spoke. "That was beautiful," she said. Daniel nodded quick, polite, almost shy. "Thank you," he answered. "You play professionally?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "Not anymore." She waited as though expecting more, but Daniel gave nothing else. He returned to cleaning, and the manager eventually stepped away. Moments like that made him uncomfortable. Compliments were easier when they didn't come with questions. After the guests began leaving, Daniel walked toward the stairway to start cleaning the upper floor. When he reached the second floor, he took out his vacuum and plugged it into the hallway outlet. As he vacuumed, pieces of the melody he played earlier replayed in his mind. Not perfect, not polished, but honest. He hadn't planned that song. It simply came out. He wondered if he should have played something simpler, something shorter. He wondered if people thought he was showing off. But then again, he remembered how still they had been, how silent. Nobody laughed during the performance, and the silence felt almost sacred. That was what mattered, not opinions afterward. He finished cleaning the second floor, then carried his supplies down to the first. The event had ended, and the decorations were half taken down. People from the catering company rolled their carts out and waved goodbye to the staff. Daniel swept, mopped, and disinfected surfaces. He worked slowly because he wanted everything spotless for the next morning. A clean lobby always made him feel proud even if no one noticed. He knew that was enough. As he reached the far side of the lobby, he sensed someone walking toward him again. He turned slowly because he expected another employee thanking him for earlier, but instead, He saw someone different. It was the head of the company, the top leader everyone knew. Daniel had only seen him a few times from a distance. He usually walked around with assistants, talking about business matters. But now he was alone. Daniel stepped back and lowered his mop automatically. "Good evening," the man said. Daniel nodded. "Good evening." There was a quiet pause. The room seemed to hold still again. "I heard the music earlier," the leader said. "I didn't know someone here could play like that." Daniel didn't know how to respond, so he only nodded again. "You studied music?" the man asked gently. "Yes," Daniel finally answered. "Years ago." "Where?" Daniel hesitated. He didn't want to sound like he was trying to impress anyone. He didn't want attention. But eventually he answered, "A conservatory downtown." The man raised his eyebrows. "That is not a small place," he said softly. "People dream of studying there." Daniel didn't reply. "Why did you stop?" the company leader asked. Daniel looked down at the mop handle and took a slow breath. "My daughter was born," he said simply. "I needed a stable income." The man nodded slowly. "I understand," he said. Then silence again. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. "Well," the leader said, shifting slightly. "Thank you. Your music reminded me of someone." Daniel waited, unsure whether to ask who. "My wife." The man continued quietly. "She used to play something very close to what you played." "I haven't heard anything like that in years." Daniel said nothing. His throat tightened slightly. He didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound intrusive. The company leader took a soft breath. "She passed away 5 years ago," he said. Daniel lowered his eyes respectfully. "I'm sorry," he whispered. The man nodded. "Your playing brought her back for a moment," he said. "Just for a moment." Daniel still couldn't lift his eyes. He felt humbled, but also uneasy, like his music entered something deeply emotional without permission. "Thank you for that," the man finished. He didn't say anything else. He didn't ask for a performance again. He simply placed one hand briefly on Daniel's shoulder and walked away. When he was gone, Daniel remained still for a moment. He didn't think the man would talk to him again, not like that. But the moment was real, and it mattered. Daniel wasn't looking for recognition. He never wanted praise. But that conversation stirred something inside him, a reminder that music holds meaning, even when people think they've forgotten it. Later that night, Daniel sat alone in the break room. His shift break usually lasted 10 minutes, but he stayed there longer just thinking. He imagined the leader's wife, young, smiling, playing that melody somewhere in a different place. Long before Daniel even worked here, he imagined the emptiness someone feels when a familiar sound disappears forever. Then he imagined giving it back, even for one small moment. That thought rested quietly inside him. He finished his coffee, stretched his back, and continued cleaning. He worked past midnight. His hands smelled like bleach, and his shirt was slightly wet from rinsing cloths. Physically, he was tired, but mentally something felt calm. When he walked toward the main entrance to check if anything else needed cleaning, he saw one more person there, the same employee who earlier laughed about the piano. He was alone now, holding his backpack straps loosely. "Hey," he said quietly. Daniel nodded. "I didn't know you played," the employee said. "It's okay," Daniel replied. "No, I mean it was really good," he continued. "Sorry if we made it weird before." Daniel could see the sincerity, so he nodded again, not holding any judgment. "Thank you," he simply said. The young employee exhaled with relief. "Well, have a good night." "You too." The employee left, and the lobby became empty again. Daniel finished wiping the last counter, switched off the lobby lights except the safety ones, and wheeled his cart back to the storage closet. Then he signed out and walked outside. The air felt cool. The sky was dark. He didn't walk fast. His body was tired, but his mind was at peace. He waited at the bus stop as usual. The bus arrived late, but he didn't mind. He reached home when streetlights flickered. His apartment was quiet. He opened the front door slowly to avoid waking Mia, but she was already awake, lying on the couch wrapped in a blanket. "You're late," she whispered, smiling. "There was extra work," he said. She sat up and hugged him. "Did you eat?" he asked. She nodded. He warmed up the food she saved for him and ate at the small dining table. Mia sat across from him, talking about school, friends, classes, and how her backpack zipper broke. Daniel listened carefully, smiling slowly at every little detail. Nothing in their world changed physically. Their apartment was still small. Their fridge was still mostly empty. Their life was still simple. But inside Daniel's heart, something had shifted, not because people applauded, not because anyone admired him, but because his music, something he had forgotten, woke up again. He realized it wasn't gone. He realized he could still give something beautiful. He realized he didn't have to stay invisible forever. After Mia fell asleep, Daniel sat beside her, brushed her hair off her forehead, and kissed her gently. Then he turned off the lights and lay on the couch, staying awake longer than usual, not because of stress, not because of worry, but because of that moment when he closed his eyes at the piano. He could still feel the keys. He could still feel the silence afterward. He could still hear that faint softness in the air when the music settled. It reminded him that human beings are not defined by what they do for money, not defined by uniforms, titles, or positions. Sometimes people hold something inside them for years, something that doesn't disappear. Just because life becomes difficult, the world may not look at them. People may not ask. Work may hide them, but talent remains, even when covered like a piano under a cloth. And that night, without planning it, without expecting anything, Daniel had uncovered it again. He did not know that someone would talk about him the next morning. He did not know that upper management would remember. He did not know that this was not the end of the moment but the beginning of something he never imagined. For now, he simply slept, unaware that tomorrow would arrive with new eyes watching him differently. The world outside still looked the same, but Daniel had changed. The next morning, the building buzzed with talk that Daniel did not expect. He arrived through the usual side entrance, holding his lunch bag and his thermos, ready to start another quiet day of work. He assumed people would forget what happened the night before. That was how life usually went. Special things fade, people move on, nothing changes. But that wasn't what happened. The moment he pushed his cleaning cart toward the lobby, he noticed something unusual. People glanced at him, not the quick glance that lasted half a second, but real, intentional looks. Some nodded politely, others smiled faintly. Daniel didn't know why. He assumed it was coincidence. He continued working. While wiping the elevator buttons, 2 employees entered. "Hey," one of them said. "He's the guy who played yesterday." Daniel paused for a moment. The other one whispered, "I heard the boss was emotional." Daniel looked down and continued wiping. He didn't want to hear anything. He didn't like attention. After the elevator doors closed, he let out a long breath. He hoped the morning would settle into silence soon. Around noon, Daniel was cleaning the meeting rooms on the 3rd floor when someone from Human Resources approached him. "Excuse me," she said with a kind tone. "The director asked if you could come downstairs for a moment." Daniel froze. "Did something happen?" he asked. "No, nothing bad," she answered. "They just want to speak with you." Daniel nodded slowly and followed her down the hallway, through the staircase, and toward the lobby. His palms began to sweat inside his gloves. He wasn't used to being called into any meeting, especially not by someone high-level. When he reached the lobby, the building's top leader was standing near the piano again, not surrounded by staff, not giving speeches, just standing quietly. He turned when Daniel approached. "Thank you for coming," he said. Daniel nodded respectfully. "I wanted to speak with you privately," the man continued. "Not about work tasks, not about your cleaning schedule, but about something else." Daniel didn't move. He simply waited. The man walked closer. "I went home last night and thought about what you played," he said slowly. "I listened to older recordings my wife once kept. Your music reminded me of her so much that I found myself crying again." Daniel looked down. His heart tightened. He never intended to bring sadness to anyone. But the leader did not seem upset, only emotional. "My wife used to play every evening," he said gently. "She didn't perform for crowds. She just played for the house, for me, for our children. Hearing you last night, it brought that feeling back." Daniel did not interrupt. The man continued, "I wanted to thank you again, but also, I want to ask something, only if you're comfortable." Daniel braced himself, unsure what was coming. "There are corporate events next month," the leader said. "I would like you to perform at them, only if you want to. You won't be doing it as a custodian, you will be doing it as a musician." Daniel blinked. He didn't answer immediately. Performing wasn't something he expected. It wasn't even something he had thought about doing again. It felt like life was asking him to step into a space he had left years ago. "You don't have to decide now," the man added gently, "but think about it." Daniel nodded. "I will think about it," he whispered. The leader smiled softly, then stepped back as if leaving space. Daniel returned to his shift, but everything inside him felt different. He cleaned surfaces, disinfected tables, ranged supplies. But he moved slower than usual because his mind kept replaying the same sentence. Perform at events. Him, not someone else. not someone who never left music. Him. By late afternoon, word had traveled even more. People whispered kindly when he passed. One woman said, "I wish I had listened properly last night." Another said, "Do you teach lessons?" Someone else asked jokingly, "Are you going to release music?" Daniel smiled politely, but didn't answer those questions deeply. He wasn't used to people being curious about him. He was used to letting people walk past him. That day, people didn't walk past. They noticed. Later that night, during his cleaning shift, something happened again. The leader came out from his office, walked toward the piano, and sat down. He didn't press any keys. He simply rested his hand on the edge, almost like someone remembering a person they loved. Daniel stood nearby, wiping down a glass wall. He pretended he didn't notice. Then the leader spoke without turning. "She used to play a piece that sounded almost exactly like yours," he said quietly. "The day she passed, the house felt silent in a way I cannot describe." Daniel felt his chest tighten again. "I spent years avoiding piano music," the man continued. "It reminded me too much of her absence." Then slowly, he said, "But yesterday, it reminded me of her presence." Daniel's eyes stung faintly. He had never expected his music to reach someone that deeply. All he ever tried to do was survive, keep working, keep providing for his daughter, keep life moving. He didn't try to move anyone. He didn't try to impress anyone. He simply played what he remembered. The leader turned and looked at him. "You made me feel like she wasn't gone," he said. Daniel nodded softly. "I'm glad," he whispered. The leader stood and walked away slowly, respectfully. Daniel stared at the piano for a moment, feeling something inside him open again, not sorrow, not shame, but meaning. When he got home that night, Mia was still awake, though her eyes were sleepy. "You came late again," she said. "Work ran long," Daniel answered. She nodded and went into the kitchen, where she handed him a plate she kept warm. It was small, just rice and vegetables, but she prepared it proudly. After he ate, they sat on the couch. "People at work heard me play piano," he said gently. Mia's eyes widened. "You played at work? Like for real?" Daniel nodded. "What did they say?" He hesitated, then answered, "They said it reminded them of someone they loved." "That's good," she said. Daniel smiled. "It was unexpectedly emotional," he said. "Are you going to play again?" she asked. "I don't know." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "You should," she whispered. Daniel didn't answer, but he held her hand for a long time. The days that followed continued to unfold in unexpected ways. One morning, the leader came walking by and asked Daniel to come upstairs to meet a few people from another department. When Daniel arrived, he saw a small group waiting. They asked him about his musical background, not out of judgment, not out of curiosity based on gossip, but genuine respect. Someone asked how long he trained. Someone asked who taught him. Someone asked what pieces he liked. He answered simply and softly. A few employees seemed surprised, not because they doubted him, but because they never imagined he had lived such a different life before working there. Later, an assistant came to him with an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Whenever you feel ready, our offer is open. Your music deserves to be heard again." Daniel folded that note carefully and placed it between two worn business cards in his wallet. But emotions, no matter how positive, come with confusion too. That evening, when he approached the piano again while dusting tables, he hesitated before touching the cover. He wondered, what if he disappointed them? What if he played again and it wasn't enough? What if expectations were too high? He stood there quietly, breathing slow. Then he lifted the cloth and gently dusted the keys. For the first time in a long time, he touched the instrument without fear, not as a performer, not as an employee, but as someone reconnecting with a part of himself he thought he lost. He whispered under his breath, "I thought this part of me was gone." But the piano didn't disappear. The keys didn't change. His hands didn't forget. The music wasn't trapped in the past. It simply waited for him, just like the moment that now waited. Ahead, when the night shift ended, Daniel sat at the bus stop again. For years that bus stop represented routine, nothing special, nothing hopeful. But that night, as cool air moved past him and streetlights glowed softly across the pavement, he felt something new. He felt welcome. He felt seen. He felt invited back into a chapter of his life he almost erased. He looked at the note again. He held it long enough for it to crease under his fingers. Then he tucked it away carefully, not because he wanted to hide it, but because he wanted to keep it safe. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know whether he would accept the invitation. But he knew for the first time in many Years that life still had surprises, and sometimes, the moments that seemed quiet end up speaking the loudest. The next morning, Daniel woke up with a strange mix of nerves and excitement. He had never imagined that a simple evening at work could change so much. The note from the leader rested on the kitchen counter, and Mia was eating her breakfast quietly, humming a tune that he vaguely recognized from one of the songs he used to play. He poured himself a cup of coffee and stared out the window. For years, life had been about survival, getting through the night shift, making sure Mia had what she needed, keeping a roof over their heads. Music had been a part of him, yes, but a hidden part, tucked away like a secret he had buried long ago. Now, he was being asked to bring it back into the world, and the thought terrified him. He didn't want to fail, not for the leader, not for the employees who had watched him the night before, and certainly not for Mia. She had already begun dreaming big on his behalf. She didn't say it aloud, but he could feel her hope pressing gently against his chest all morning. He cleaned with more care than usual, every movement deliberate. He scrubbed floors, polished tables, wiped fingerprints from glass doors. It wasn't because the building demanded perfection. It was because he suddenly realized that people were noticing him in ways he hadn't experienced before. That recognition was subtle, quiet, but it mattered. When he paused to rest near the piano, he allowed himself to glance at it. The black keys gleamed under the soft ceiling lights. He ran a hand over them softly, remembering the night before, the silence that followed his playing, the stillness that spoke louder than applause ever could. A small voice in his mind said, "You can do this again." But another voice whispered fear. What if it's not enough? What if they expect something you can't give? He shook his head and continued with his work. Later that afternoon, the leader approached him again, walking down the hallway without any assistance this time. Daniel stopped mid-step, unsure if he should greet him formally or casually. "Good afternoon," Daniel said softly. "Good afternoon," the leader replied, smiling gently. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I wanted to ask if you had thought more about performing at the upcoming events." Daniel swallowed. "Yes, I have thought about it." "Good," the leader said, nodding. "I understand this is new for you. There's no pressure, only if you feel ready." Daniel hesitated. The idea of playing in front of people again after so many years felt almost impossible. But he also knew this was a rare opportunity, one that could change more than just how others saw him. It could change how he saw himself. I think I'm ready," he finally said. The leader's eyes lit up just slightly, a quiet relief passing across his face. "I'm glad. We'll make arrangements. You won't be alone. We'll provide support, and no one will rush you. I just want your music to be shared." Daniel nodded. He felt a mixture of nerves and calm he hadn't felt in years. The feeling was unfamiliar, but it was good. The next few days passed differently than usual. Daniel cleaned with the same precision, but the atmosphere around him had changed. Employees smiled at him, greeted him with more warmth than before, and occasionally asked questions about his musical background. He answered politely, never exaggerating, never boasting, simply speaking truthfully about the years of practice and study he had once devoted to music. At home, he and Mia began small rituals of music again. Some evenings, he played quietly on her small keyboard while she drew, listening attentively to every note. Sometimes she asked him to teach her simple melodies. Sometimes she hummed along. For the first time in many years, Daniel felt like he was passing something meaningful to someone else, not just survival, but joy, expression, and creativity. When the day of the first corporate event arrived, Daniel arrived early, cleaning supplies in tow as usual. But this time, he carried something more, a quiet confidence and a small sheet of notes he had prepared. The leader met him at the lobby entrance. "You look ready," the leader said, smiling. "I think I am," Daniel replied, his hands gripping the cleaning cart lightly. "You don't have to worry," the leader reassured him. "Just play. Everything else will fall into place." Daniel nodded, trying to calm the fluttering in his stomach. The event began in a large conference room filled with people in suits and dresses, all talking quietly in groups. Daniel pushed aside his cleaning cart and approached the piano, the same one he had played months before during the accidental moment that had changed everything. He touched the keys briefly, feeling the cool surface, remembering the silence that had followed his first performance. Then, slowly, he began to play. The notes came softly at first, like whispers in a room. His hands remembered every movement, every shift of weight, even the smallest gestures that shaped the music. It was not about showing skill. It was not about impressing anyone. It was about honesty. about letting the sound reach people the way it had reached him all those years ago. He played a melody that he had written himself, a song full of emotion, full of longing and hope, full of the quiet resilience that had carried him through nights alone, nights when Mia was his whole world. People stopped talking. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Even the servers carrying trays paused. Every ear in the room listened. Some people closed their eyes. Some leaned forward, holding their hands lightly in front of them. Some just sat still, captivated by the depth and simplicity of the music. Daniel didn't look at anyone. He didn't need to. He let the music flow, letting years of hidden emotions pour out through his fingers. Every note held memories of sacrifice, love, fear, and endurance. Every chord was an unspoken story about life, quiet, resilient, human. By the time the last note faded, the room remained silent for a heartbeat longer than usual. Then, slowly, the applause began. It was soft at first, but it grew steadily. People stood, clapping with respect and wonder. Some had tears in their eyes, and a few could not hide how moved they were. Daniel stood quietly, bowed slightly, and stepped back. He didn't need applause. He had already felt the fulfillment of sharing something he had kept hidden for years. But hearing the reaction confirmed what he had long suspected. Music, when it is honest, speaks to people in ways words cannot. The leader approached him after the applause had quieted down. He wiped a tear from his eye. "That was beautiful," he said, voice thick with emotion. "I can't tell you how much this means. You've given something here that will not be forgotten." Daniel nodded, smiling faintly. "No one else could have done it," the leader continued. "Not just the notes but you, the way you played. It reached people. It made them feel." Daniel's chest tightened. It had been years since anyone had said anything like that to him. He felt pride, not in himself, but in being able to share something meaningful after the event. Daniel was invited to perform again for smaller gatherings and company functions. But the change went beyond the music. People treated him differently. He was no longer invisible. Employees greeted him warmly, sometimes asking him about his day, sometimes about his daughter. The leader often stopped to check on him, making sure he felt comfortable and respected. Even more than the recognition, Daniel felt a sense of purpose. Music was no longer something locked away. It had become part of his daily life again, intertwined with work, family, and community. It was proof that human beings carry beauty inside them, even when life feels dull or difficult. At home, the changes were just as subtle but equally meaningful. Mia noticed that her father smiled more often. He was calmer in the evenings, lighter in spirit. Their small apartment, once a place of simple survival, began to feel warmer not because of new furniture or decorations, but because Daniel brought energy and joy into it. They played music together. She learned simple songs on her small keyboard, and he guided her hands when necessary. They laughed when mistakes happened and celebrated every correct note with small, shared excitement. Music became their language of connection. Months later, the leader arranged a private conversation with Daniel in his office. "I've been thinking," he said. "Your story, your journey, your dedication, people need to know it. Not to glorify you, but to inspire. Life is not always easy, but it can be full of unexpected opportunities." Daniel listened quietly, unsure where this was going. "We'd like to feature you in the company newsletter." The leader continued. "Share a bit about your life, your music, and the journey you've been through. Only if you feel comfortable." Daniel hesitated, but then nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "I think I can do that." The day he shared his story publicly was emotional. People read about a single father who had sacrificed dreams to care for his daughter. They read about the quiet custodian who played piano beautifully, touching the hearts of employees and leaders alike. The story spread beyond the office, reaching others who admired his resilience and talent. Daniel never sought fame. He never wanted it. But the recognition was humbling and grounding. It reminded him that life often surprises us in ways we cannot predict. That small actions, quiet talents, and years of unseen effort can one day be noticed, appreciated, and even celebrated. One evening, as he sat with Mia after another small practice session, he reflected quietly. He thought about the nights when he worked silently, the times he missed her smiles while cleaning the building floors, the years he had hidden his talent, and he realized that none of those years were wasted. Every struggle, every sleepless night, every sacrifice had shaped him into the